Welcome, viewers, to a riveting journey back in time, a tale etched in the annals of history. In this video, we delve into the harrowing experiences of the Anzacs on their first night in Gallipoli. From the serene departure in Egypt to the abrupt immersion into the chaos of war, witness the unfolding of an extraordinary chapter. Join us as we navigate the treacherous waters under heavy fire, landing on the shores of uncertainty. As bullets whiz and shells burst, camaraderie and resilience take center stage. We'll guide you through the intense moments, the camaraderie, and the unexpected challenges faced by these men. This is not just a recounting of events, it's an immersive journey into the heart of conflict, where survival and courage intertwine.
We had left Egypt on a peaceful Sunday afternoon. Now we were in the very thick of a wonderful and exciting war, for we were being towed ashore in pinnaces, each holding about 250 men, half the regiment, and were under heavy fire. Gunboats were booming away, shells were bursting, and aeroplanes were sweeping about the sky. All these things gave us a good idea of what was going on. How did we take it, not being used to the business? Well, the chaps sat in the pinnaces and looked at one another to see how they stood it. We were landing in broad daylight, the boats were packed, bullets were dropping all around us, sending nasty little spits of water up, and bullets from rifles and machine guns were whizzing over our heads. I was watching the impression it was having on the others. Some of our chaps were wearing war medals, and I made up my mind to carry on as they were doing. If they took it all right, so would I. They did take it all right. As the bullets dropped round us, I heard such remarks as, "By Jove! If that hit a fellow, it would hurt him." Then men would laugh. Our colonel, I was sitting near him in the pinnace, looked stern and calm. He knew better than most of us what it meant. We were lucky in our landing, for we had no casualties, but a lot of the other troops, who were landing at the same time and in the same way, were picked off. We lay off till one of the naval boats got alongside. We all tumbled into her and were taken to the beach for landing. The Turks saw us landing and gave us 5 shells, but these did not hurt anybody. We were told to hurry up, but we didn't need telling to do that, and as soon as the boat was at the shore, we hopped onto a little wharf and found ourselves in the thick of some Indians who were unloading sheep. So little did we need telling to hurry up that I well remember how we rushed through the sheep in our eagerness to get to shelter. We were in fine spirits and made the best of it, but as soon as we landed, we realized what we were in for. A shell came and burst amongst a fatigue party, knocking the men about badly and wounding half a dozen, but luckily not killing anybody. This showed us how necessary it was to take cover, and when we had got some distance up the heights and were ordered to dig in, we set to work with a will, and we readily obeyed the order to keep our heads well down, as the shrapnel was bursting over the top of us. Our regiment was keeping well together. The colonel was in a gully just below me when a shell burst over us. It seemed to be high, and we did not realize the danger of such explosions. This shell seemed to be harmless, but I soon discovered that a fragment or bullet of it had struck the colonel in the leg. As this was the headquarters, the doctor was handy, and he attended to the colonel straight away and sent him to the beach on a stretcher. 2 minutes afterwards, one of the squadron clerks got shot with a shrapnel bullet. This also happened near me, and I saw what happened to him. The bullet struck him just by the right temple. He had the closest possible shave of instant death and carried the eye away. This chap was put out of action at once and was sent on to Malta. About 10 days later he wrote to us saying what rotten luck he had had, but he was a cheerful soul and made the best of things, though he said, "Very truly, I have only had a one-eyed view of Malta. We got dug in. There were holes in front of us, about 4 feet deep, with head covering, about 2 feet of earth on top of us, but these did not give much protection from shells that burst just overhead. Some of the men filled empty biscuit tins with earth and put them alongside to protect their legs from stray and spent bullets, and these proved very useful. When we had dug in, we were ordered to eat our iron rations for tea. Then, about 8 o'clock, they called the regiment to fall in, as the Turks were going to attack us. We stood up as reinforcements at a place called Shrapnel Gully, and well, it deserved its name, as we soon learned, for there were a terrible lot of casualties there, especially amongst the fatigue parties which had to go to the beach for water. You will see that we were initiated straight away. We did not know the danger of it at the time, and never thought that we should be so soon put through it after landing, but it was astonishing to see how well the chaps settled down to the business. We had been landed only a few hours, and yet we were standing to arms, waiting for the Turks to come on. We expected them with a rush, for we had been told that Enver Bey, the Minister of War, had ordered that the Anzacs were to be thrown into the sea. Well, we didn't mean to be thrown. We were standing on open ground. There were two very high hills, and we were in the gully at the bottom. Some of our troops were dug in on the top of the hills, and the Turks were dug in on the top of us, some of them being not more than 50 yards away. It was a pitch-dark night, and a nerve-wracking job waiting for the promised onslaught. Time passed, and it seemed as if the Turks would never come, but at 3 in the morning they let themselves loose. The word was passed along, the enemy is advancing in front, and we were all ordered to stand fast till 2 blasts of the whistle had been sounded. It was hard to make out anything in that inky blackness, even with the eyes of bushmen, but we knew that the Turks had crawled out of their trenches, and that they were going to throw themselves upon us. Then 2 shrill blasts struck the still night, and instantly there was a fearful commotion, for the Turks hopped up from the ground and charged, yelling and firing, and making all sorts of deafening noises, amongst which we noticed a trumpeter doing his best to blow our own call of the officer. Mess. They seemed to blow anything that came along, so as to confuse us in the pitch darkness, and a startling business it was, too, to peer into the blackness and see the figures of the Turks by the light of the bursting shells and crackling rifle. Never while I live shall I forget that fight in the first night we were ashore in Gallipoli. We did our best to see what was going on by looking through the potholes in the sandbags of the trenches, though at night you could look over the tops of the parapets, but it was little enough that we could make out in the darkness. We had our magazines loaded and our bayonets fixed. The infantry alongside were in posses, as we called them, holes dug in the trenches to keep a man from being exposed. 2 men were in each posse, one firing and the other loading for him, so that a constant fire was kept up. One of our fellows, terribly excited, had crawled up onto the sandbags, and there he stood, just seen in the darkness by the flashes of fire, for about 10 minutes, when he was ordered down. At this time I was a non-combatant, one of the stretcher-bearers, and I was just standing, waiting for somebody to get hit, so I could see everything that was going on. The shells were flying round all the time, making a fearful noise, and an Indian battery above us was doing good work. In a posse high above us were the machine guns, and we could see, even in the darkness, what havoc they were causing amongst the enemy. In the loud cries that arose I heard a Scotchman of our regiment shout, "Here comes a big Turk with a brick in his hand." We peered into the blackness and saw a big, fine Turk crawling on the ground about 5 yards away, holding in his hand something that looked like a brick. The machine guns got him just as he jumped up. The bullets fairly smothered him, and he dropped like 1,000 of bricks. Later on, I had a good look at him, and found that the thing he carried was not a brick, but a bomb. He had no boots on, but his feet were wrapped in cloth, so that he made no sound. He had managed to get within 10 paces of us. The din quietened down as daylight came, which was about 5 o'clock. We looked eagerly around us to see what had been done, and noticed the dead Turks everywhere, many of them in clusters of half a dozen, just as they had been mown down by our machine guns. Later on we learned that the number of the Turkish dead was 2,000, so that the ground was fairly strewn with bodies. We were ordered back to our trenches. where we had breakfast and a bit of rest, but at 10 o'clock we were told to fall in again as the Turks were making another charge. The enemy did come on, but rather half-heartedly, and they were repulsed without our aid. They had made a fine and brave dash in the night, as we saw. They never got into our trenches, but we were told that they had rushed in farther round where the New Zealanders were, but they had been bayoneted straight away. In the afternoon the Turks put up a white flag and asked for an armistice to bury the dead. A big old Turk walked towards us, and he was met by Captain Massey, a famous Australian amateur champion, an all-round athlete of splendid physique. The Turk was blindfolded and brought into our trenches and then taken to headquarters, and after he had been questioned an armistice was granted. The firing ceased, and the Turks came out with all their stretcher-bearers, and our stretcher-bearers and diggers went out too, and the burials went on, and not before they were necessary, for the stenches were awful. This sad work was being done when our artillery observers noticed that the Turks were bringing up guns and reinforcements from the gully at the back of our chaps, and we were ordered to come in. That ended the armistice for the time, and the Turks at the back were fired on, and their little game stopped. Next morning there was another armistice, for it was absolutely necessary to get on with the burials. The atmosphere was almost unendurable, and, even on landing, the stench from dead mules and so on was so horrible that it nearly made me bilious. On that second morning, I was able to see that a lot of our chaps were lying between our parapet and the Turks' parapet. We made an exchange of bodies, and having got our men's identification discs, we buried them in the small trenches so that the fighting places became grey. All these things that I have told about happened within 30 hours of our landing, and the fortune of war had sent some of the Anzacs to their last resting place and put others, wounded, on the list for home. Men were sent off, their fighting careers ended after having been in the enemy's country for only a few hours. We were pretty philosophical over the business. I remember one of the men in my squadron saying, "If your name's on a bullet, you're going to stop it." Soon afterwards, a 4.7 got him. The Turks used to fire like mad. It was astonishing to see how many bullets they fired, but even at that early stage our men went off duty, were asleep and taking no notice of them. At this time we were opposite Lone Pine, attached to the 4th Australian Battalion as infantry. After the fighting, we had exactly a month in the trenches, and then relieved some infantry who had had 3 weeks of solid fighting. We were relieved and went to a rest camp near Gallipoli. We had 7 days there, with a good deal of excitement one way and another, and plenty of casualties, for we were being called out every day. It was rumoured that Achi Baba was going to fall, and we were ordered into the firing line as supports for the 5th Light Horse. The 5th were going out in front to draw the Turks' fire and keep reinforcements from going down to Achi Baba. Some of the 6th and 7th Light Horse were to stand by and act as reinforcements. My troop was in the firing line. The 5th hopped out right on the beach and ran for Gallipoli under cover of the ridges. The 7th got up on our left. We were in the middle. The squadron of the 7th ran along under cover of the ridge in the same direction as the 5th. They went a good while without drawing the fire of the Turks, who did not seem to notice them, but fire was opened at last. Still, the advance continued more cautiously now, our fellows crawling when they could for shelter. The Turks got a few lucky shells in amongst the 5th, and the casualties began to come in. There were some odd incidents. Our sergeant was peering through a lookout with a pair of glasses, his right hand being round them. Another sergeant said, "Let's have a peep." Our sergeant pulled his head back and straightened himself, but still held the glasses with his hand in front of the hole. The other sergeant was just stepping up to take the glasses, when a bullet came through the hole and went clean through the hand that still held the glasses, putting our sergeant out of action. We took him to the dressing station, and he was not long before he was back in the firing line, which was more than would have happened if the sergeant had been still bending down and had got the bullet in his head. He was a nice chap, a station manager from Queensland. In about 2 hours, volunteers were asked for to bring in wounded colonials from the front. There were a good many casualties by this time, and plenty for the stretcher-bearers to do. We got to 2 men who, we saw at once, were very badly wounded. They were pretty well sheltered, and it was thought better to leave them where they were for the present, and not try to move them. One man had his foot blown off by shrapnel, and he was otherwise very badly wounded. A stretcher-bearer had bound him up roughly and put a tourniquet on to stop the bleeding, and another chap had carried him on his back to shelter. Several of the stretcher-bearers were killed and wounded at this time, but I do not think that the firing on them was deliberate. The other man was a trumpeter. He was a little chap, and we called him Scotty because he had gone out to Australia from Scotland. He was wounded in the abdomen, and was in agony, but we managed to relieve his suffering with half a grain of morphia. The flies were swarming and were terribly troublesome. I tried to keep them off with a wet towel. I had to wet it in salt water so that they should not annoy him. I noticed that his boots were torn, and I took them off. I then saw that his legs had not been dressed, and he had been lying there for some time. I put iodine on the wound.